So, life has been weird. Quarantine's still going on, and I translated a book written by my dad. Well, it's not really a book, it's not that long after all, but it's still something that kept me occupied for a while. In the meantime, it's getting close to November, so it's about time to kick that bloated ass out of the White House. It's not guaranteed in any way, and don't get me wrong, Biden isn't exactly much of an upgrade, but one can only hope. The real big news is that yesterday, a student I taught at the agency contacted me via WeChat, not in person. By the way, keep social distancing, guys. Anyway, her name is Serena, and she delivered the fantastic news that she had achieved her desired score. Here's a score report. I gotta say, every time I see a student achieving such a phenomenal score, I can't help but to feel proud for them like a mama hen. Sure, I can't take all the credit. I'll take like 80%. The rest 20% will be me scolding her for only scoring 85 on reading. Like, come on, if you were to overachieve anyway, do it properly and get 4 9s. All joking aside, huge congratulations to Serena, and I wish that her immigration application goes more smoothly than mine. Let's go into our topic for today. We're officially beginning our journey to tackling listening, the scariest monster out there that keeps you awake at night. Do pay close attention so you can score 90 like a champ just as Serena did. We began by taking a look at LMC CSA and LMC CMA. I'm sure you're very familiar with these catchy acronyms, so let's skip about 20 minutes of lecture and move on. Wait, you don't know what they are? Hasn't Pearson made them so obvious for you? Right. Listening multiple choice, choose single answer, and listening multiple choice, choose multiple answers. There you go. You will get 2 to 3 questions each in the test, and there are somewhere along the fixed order of question types showing up one after another. Is there anything that needs to be said that I hadn't covered while talking about the reading counterparts? It's a convenient segue to remind you to go back and watch some of the older videos. I'll quickly go through some of the basics again. There will be only one correct option for each listening multiple choice choose single answer, but for listening multiple choice choose multiple answers, there will be more than one, so at least 2. Listening multiple choice choose multiple answers is also akin to reading multiple choice choose multiple answers in the way that if you pick a wrong option, whatever points you have earned for picking the correct options will be deducted. It's just a neat way to prevent you from brainlessly picking every option. Of course, the score for each question will never dip below 0, but if you're actually okay with getting a 0, then why are you here? So that's about it. You listen to an audio talking about whatever, and then you pick out the correct option or options among the given, options. It's really as straightforward as it gets, so understandably, students should be getting a perfect score every time, right? You see, here comes the problem. The listening materials can actually be about literally whatever. How does the Big Bang Theory theme song goes? Mad science history, unraveling the mystery, something like that. And the listening passages are just like that. You will be surprised at how much trivial information you can actually learn from these questions, and oftentimes students will find it difficult to actually comprehend. For reading, at least you can stare at the text and pretend to be interpreting whatever message it's trying to convey, but you only get to listen to the audio once. And if you fail to extract much out of it, then you're screwed. So how can you prevent that? The simplest answer is to just practice more. There certainly are techniques you can exploit, but for all intents and purposes, practice is the only assuring way to actually improve. That's why I proposed the method of comparing notes. After every audio is played, I will be showing you guys the quote-unquote notes I prepared for that question. It will be a bogged-down version of the useful info from the audio, basically the minimal amount of stuff you have to get from the audio to make the correct choice. This will be our main way to discuss individual questions, but what else we got? The second tool that I strongly recommend, even though this is also covered in the reading episodes, is for you to read the question first. Before the audio plays for each question, you have a few seconds to quickly go through some of the text on your screen. Utilize the time to go through it quickly so you can have a general idea of what it's asking you. Sometimes this doesn't help because many questions will just be asking for the main idea, so you will then have to pay close attention to all the details throughout. However, if the question asks something very specific, then you have the luxury to just look for the keywords and disregard everything else. This is slightly risky because you might accidentally ignore something that's actually important, so be careful. At the beginning, I strongly recommend that you try to take more notes than necessary. It's always easier to write something down and later decide they're worthless than to have nothing written down and then try to recall the details. Lastly, I would like to point out one extremely important technique. It's also something we covered before, but it greatly applies to these pesky listening multiple choice questions, so it's worth talking about them again. Numbers don't matter. You hear the passage talking about dates, then you just need to know which came first and which came later. If you hear a big number, substitute the number with big. If you hear a very specific number, instead of writing it down and then going on a hunt for the number in the options, you should be aware that an option can still be very wrong, even with that exact number in it. Having a number mentioned in the passage does not make an option correct. On the contrary, that's a common way for Pearson to debate test takers into making a mistake. Don't blindly follow the numbers. Understand its implied meaning and then make an educated choice. We all set? Let's begin with the first question for today. The question asks for the main idea, so it's a good cue for you to grasp the main concept and not focus too much on the trivial bits. Here we go.
I have chronic pain, and at times this is severe, but this is managed with opiates. I know the general public has a very perverted view of opiates because they think street addiction, heroin, drug smugglers. However, if prescribed correctly by doctors in the right dose for your height and weight, and you manage it well yourself, I haven't increased my dose of 80 milligrams of morphine in the last 18 years. So that's a fairly good illustration that no, you don't double it every 10 minutes the way the general public think. And also it's very well looked after by the government. I have to present myself to my GPs, who all get to know me very well, every 30 days, and they have to phone Canberra to have authorisation, and I get my monthly dose of opiates to keep me going for the next lot.
This question is the perfect embodiment of the idea that numbers suck. 3 of the options have numbers in them, and just as a heads up, all 3 of them are false. Let's take a quick look at my notes. This lady is suffering from a type of pain. You don't really need to go as far as writing down chronic pain because the adjective here doesn't matter as much. Because she's in pain, she needs a certain type of medication to help her manage the pain, namely opiates. This word shows up in some of the options and many of you might not know what it is. I just have a vague idea of the thing because, you know, I'm not a doctor, but it's enough to understand that she needs to take pills. Later, she mentions something about addiction and how this might relate to heroin, which I do think you should have heard about. Then she talks about her doctor prescribing her with the appropriate dosage, and she hasn't had trouble with developing an addiction to the drug in the past many years. Lastly, she mentions how the government is in this whole thing to look after everyone, to prevent any addiction or overdosing from happening in the first place. Now that we have discussed what the passage was about, let's go back to the options. Option A has the dose 80 milligrams in it. This just happens to be exactly what her dose was, but you should realize that it was her dose, not anyone else's. Therefore, even though the number is very accurate, it's not the usual dose. If you're curious about how the dose was determined, the speaker actually explained that it was given according to her height and weight. Even if you missed that when listening, I still think you should be able to tell that the speaker was mainly talking for herself in the whole audio, so option A is incorrect. Moving on to option B, we can use a very similar logic. The number 18 years is also very accurate, but in the passage, it was the speaker's own observation for the past 18 years, the time that her dosage remained constant without developing an addiction. She wasn't speaking for anyone else or the general public, so it's also incorrect. Ironically, option C seems to be the most generic option and the only one without a number, but it's actually the right one. The government plays a role to supervise the whole process to ensure that patients like the speaker herself would be given a correct amount of drugs to deal with their pain and to avoid becoming addicted. Based on her accent and the fact that she mentioned Canberra, we can safely assume that she's Australian. If only the US government had been this diligent when fighting drug crimes, but instead this administration hasn't done jack. But I digress. Looking at option D, we can determine that it is incorrect. I did kind of give it away in the beginning, but it's important for you to notice that D is really correct through and through, including the number. It's not the right pick only because it's not what the prompt asked for. It's not the main idea. At most, it's a supporting detail that goes on to elaborate on option C, so it's not an ideal pick here. Not too bad for a first question. This is a true single answer. Here you have the transcript for the first question. Pause the video here if you want to have a look, and here comes the second question. This one again asks for the purpose of the talk. Different phrasing, but very much the same gist with the last one. Here comes the audio.
If you think about light bulbs, they're an enormous infrastructure. They're in every building in the world, more or less. They have kind of a privileged position above us, around us. They can see, if you think about it, most parts of any room. The kind of key was to say, well, what if we consider a light bulb not to be a light bulb, but actually to be a digital projector? It just happens to be really low resolution. In fact, it's a 1x1 pixel digital projector. Turn on the wall switch, and a giant pixel comes out and paints your room. Okay, well, that's ludicrous, but what if you put a higher resolution projector inside that same familiar glass bulb? Well, now you have a device that can illuminate if you turn on all the pixels the same color. You still have a light bulb in the usual sense. But if you turn on the pixels different amounts and different colors, then you're kind of projecting information out into the world. And if at the same time that you're doing that, you put a little tiny camera inside the bulb, then not only is information flowing out of the glass, but you're collecting optical information. So screw one of those into every one of these fixtures, and suddenly you have a means, potentially, to display an interaction everywhere throughout the world.
This passage is, how should I put this, quite strange. At the beginning, the speaker talks about light bulbs, something all of us should be quite familiar with, and how they are present everywhere in most buildings. That's all fun and games until he proposed the idea that light bulbs are actually not light bulbs. He wanted us to see them as projectors. You know, the thingy that college professors still insist on using instead of going digital because they are too lazy to record their freaking lectures. Moreover, the light bulb only has 1 pixel. It's a strange concept, but okay. He then talks about a light bulb but with a higher resolution, so that one bulb can give off more pixels. This turns the light bulb into an actual projector that can send information. I gotta admit, it's a pretty cool idea. If you ignore some of the glaringly obvious flaws and technical difficulties to actually pull this off, it's a pretty cool idea. The next bit is actually just ridiculous. Not only are we making the light bulbs HD, we are actually going to include a camera in them so they can both send and receive optical information. I must say, this dude is not living the ideal sci-fi dream. If you want to picture something futuristic and crazy, go big. Don't just get hung up on light bulbs. Light bulbs. Whatever, let's take a look at the options. It's quite obvious that option A is incorrect. Nowhere in the passage does our dude talk about money, so there you go. Option B is a good pick. Even though I think that he's getting too ridiculous with this idea, he even says so in the passage himself that it's ludicrous, he is kinda demonstrating the point that something as common as a light bulb can inspire new ideas and bring about some cool changes. Turning light bulbs into cameras and projectors sound kinda crazy, because there's a Big Brother vibe to the whole thing, but I guess it's still some kind of inspiration. Option C is not the one to pick, because nowhere in the text mentions a scientific study. We're all just daydreaming with our dude. Option D is also incorrect. The dude didn't talk about anything artistic or anything that's going on an exhibition. He sounds like a nerd talking about a nerdy subject. Sure, he was creative, to put it nicely, but he was nowhere artistic. Speaking of being creative, option E is correct. He surely has proven to us that even such a lame idea can get you a public speech where strangers actually listen to this kind of crap. And this actually made its way into a test. This is a choose multiple answers because we have found more than one correct answer. And here's a quick peek at the transcript. Let's move on to the next one, shall we? Once again, we have a question asking about the general idea, so don't slack off and pay attention throughout the whole thing, will ya?
I should say one more thing about theory. It's great to discover theory, but you have to lose a lot. And you may have noticed, or maybe you didn't, how much you lose. Partly you don't notice it much because here at the university everybody's dedicated to theory. And what's left out is perception, because you use your mind, not your eyes. Skill, you're not supposed to have any particular sort of bodily kind of skills. There's a kind of mental thing, but let's not call that skill. I mean, I'm just calling skill the way you cope with everyday stuff that you use and so forth. Intuition, it's not fair to have intuition. I mean, you can have intuition, but it's not theory. It's not something that everybody has to believe until you can put it into language and argue for it. Gets rid of emotions, the body, tradition.
This one is somewhat similar to the first sample question we looked at today. Everything in every option is mentioned somewhere in the text, and lo and behold, most of them are incorrect. Let's go through the notes first, and what do you know? All 4 keywords, namely perception, intuition, theory, and skill, show up in the notes because they were talked about by the speaker. Firstly, he talks about how it's great to develop a theory, but in the process, you will be losing out on other things. This is actually the only thing you need to know to pick option C as a definitely correct answer, and you can basically stop there. If you still want to summarize everything else, it's simply saying that you will be leaving out perception, skill, and intuition while you are focused on your theory, and that's it. It's really not that difficult. Sure, he stuttered quite a bit, so it's somewhat annoying, but that's really the only important message he wanted to get across. Theory is important, but there are other things in life that you nerds should not give up on. Here's the transcript. I like how Pearson actually tried to include the broken parts in his speech. Very faithful to the source. That will be all for today. Some quick and easy multiple choice questions to get us warmed up for future listening torture. Questions. There will be a walkthrough on this topic coming up, and then we'll be having more multiple choice questions. How about that? What an exciting prospect. Please like, subscribe, and share if this has been helpful, and let me know in the comments below if you have any questions. Let's not vote for Donald Trump, and I'll see you all next time.